In a quiet suburban neighborhood where manicured lawns hide family secrets, 68-year-old Marion Williams notices what others refuse to see. When her 12-year-old granddaughter Adeline arrives at her doorstep with yet another accident, covered in bruises and trembling with fear. Marion's 4 decades of teaching experience tell her something is terribly wrong. The culprit, according to everyone, is Adeline herself, clumsy, accident-prone, always getting hurt. But Marion sees the flinches, the darting glances, the way Adeline shrinks whenever her 16-year-old sister Callista enters the room. While the family praises Callista as the perfect daughter, responsible, caring, mature beyond her years, Marion suspects a darker truth lurking beneath the surface. Armed with patience, determination, and the investigative instincts of a seasoned educator, Marion embarks on a dangerous mission to uncover the reality behind her granddaughter's relationship. What she discovers will shatter her family's carefully constructed facade and force them to confront a truth more disturbing than anyone imagined. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to look away. Marion Williams had taught elementary school for 40 years before retiring, and in that time, she developed an almost supernatural ability to detect when children weren't telling the truth. So, when 12-year-old Adeline stumbled into her kitchen that Tuesday afternoon, tears streaming down her face and a dark bruise blooming on her forearm, Marion's internal alarm bells began ringing. "Callista hit me again. Grandma," Adeline whispered, her voice barely audible. She kept glancing toward the front door, as if expecting her 16-year-old sister to appear at any moment. Before Marion could respond, Callista burst through the door, her own eyes red with tears. "Oh God, Grandma, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to." Adeline fell down the stairs, and I tried to catch her, but I grabbed her arm too hard. I feel terrible. Marion watched this scene unfold with the practiced eye of someone who'd seen countless playground dramas. Something felt off. Adeline's body language screamed fear, not just pain. The way she flinched when Callista approached, the darting glances, the trembling, these weren't the reactions of a girl who'd simply been accidentally hurt by her sister. Callista's performance was equally troubling. The tears seemed genuine enough, but Marion noticed her eyes weren't actually red or swollen. The remorse appeared calculated, almost rehearsed. "I would never hurt her on purpose. You know that, Grandma," Callista continued, her voice breaking at just the right moments. "Of course, dear," Marion replied carefully, pulling both girls into her kitchen. "Accidents happen. Let's get some ice on that bruise." As she tended to Adeline's arm, Marion made a decision. Instead of jumping to conclusions or confronting anyone immediately, she would watch. She would observe. After 4 decades of working with children, she knew that the truth had a way of revealing itself to those patient enough to wait for it. That evening, after both girls had gone home, Marion sat in her favorite armchair and began what would become her investigation journal. On the first page, she wrote, "Something is very wrong in this house, and I'm going to find out what." The following weekend, Marion invited Adeline to stay over, making sure to extend the invitation when Callista wasn't around. She wanted to observe her younger granddaughter's behavior when she felt safe. The transformation was remarkable. Away from her sister's presence, Adeline blossomed like a flower finally receiving sunlight. She chattered about school, laughed at Marion's old stories, and helped in the garden with genuine enthusiasm. This was the real Adeline, curious, funny, intelligent, not the frightened shadow she became around Callista. But even in this safe space, traces of trauma remained. When the phone rang, Adeline jumped as if she'd been struck. When a car door slammed outside, she froze mid-sentence and listened intently. "Is Callista coming over?" she asked repeatedly throughout the day. always with that same note of barely concealed dread. "Just us today, sweetheart." Marion would reassure her, and each time she watched Adeline's shoulders relax just a little bit more. During bath time, Marion discreetly noted more bruises, some fresh, some fading to yellow-green. When she gently asked about them, Adeline's responses were always the same: "I'm clumsy," or "I fell," or "Callista was just trying to help me." But her eyes never met Marion's when she said these things. That night, as Adeline slept peacefully in the guest room, Marion began her documentation in earnest. She took photographs of the bruises with her digital camera, careful to capture their size and coloration. She wrote detailed notes about Adeline's behavioral changes, her flinching responses, her constant vigilance. She also began to see patterns. The bruises were often in places that would be hidden by clothing. The explanations for them were always slightly different, but followed the same theme of clumsiness or accident. Most telling of all, they always seemed to occur when no adults were present to witness them. By Sunday evening, when Adeline reluctantly returned home, Marion had filled 6 pages in her journal. She was no longer operating on suspicion alone, she was conducting an investigation. The breakthrough came 2 weeks later, on a Thursday afternoon when Marion had supposedly gone to the grocery store. She'd actually returned early, parking around the corner and entering through her back gate to retrieve something she'd forgotten. That's when she saw Callista in her backyard, apparently having climbed over the fence. Hidden behind her kitchen window, Marion watched in horror as her 16-year-old granddaughter methodically began to hurt herself. Callista struck her own hand against the brick wall of the garden shed, wincing but continuing until red marks appeared. Then she scratched her arm with a garden tool, creating realistic-looking scrape marks. But the most chilling part came next. Callista pulled out her phone and began practicing her facial expressions in the camera app, rehearsing different ways to cry, testing which angles made her look most pitiful. She was preparing for a performance. Marion's hands shook as she managed to capture some of this scene on her own phone's camera. The video quality wasn't perfect, but it was clear enough to show Callista deliberately harming herself. 20 minutes later, Callista knocked on Marion's front door, tears streaming down her face, holding her injured hand. "Grandma, Adeline pushed me and I fell into your garden shed. Look what happened." Marion's heart broke not just for what she was witnessing, but for what it meant. This wasn't a one-time occurrence. This was a system, a practiced deception that had probably been going on for months, maybe years. "Oh my," Marion said, playing along while her mind raced. "That looks painful. Where is Adeline?" "She ran home," Callista sobbed. "She was so angry because I wouldn't let her use my phone. I was just trying to keep her from breaking it. And she got so mad." Every word was a lie. Every tear was calculated. And somewhere across town, Adeline was probably preparing to be blamed for something she hadn't done. That night, Marion didn't sleep. She reviewed the video dozens of times, her teacher's heart aching for both children, one being systematically abused, the other so lost in her own psychological maze that she couldn't see the harm she was causing. Marion had always been methodical. It was what made her such an effective teacher. Now, she applied those same organizational skills to building a case that would protect Adeline and get Callista the help she clearly needed. First, she installed several small security cameras around her house. She researched the legal implications carefully and made sure she was within her rights as a homeowner. The cameras were motion activated and recorded in high definition. Next, she began creating more opportunities for both girls to spend time at her house, always ensuring there were periods when they were together without direct adult supervision. It felt manipulative, but Marion told herself she was gathering evidence to protect an innocent child. She also began reaching out to other adults in the girls' lives, always carefully and casually. She spoke with their teachers, their neighbors, even the parents of their friends. The picture that emerged was consistent. Callista was seen as the responsible, mature older sister, while Adeline was viewed as clumsy and accident-prone. "That poor girl is always covered in bruises," commented Mrs. Henderson, who lived next door to the family. "But Callista is such a good big sister, always taking care of her." Marion's research into child psychology was equally enlightening. She learned about manipulative behavior disorders, about how intelligent, Chapter 4, planning the evidence collection children could develop sophisticated systems of deception, and most importantly, about how early intervention could make all the difference in treatment outcomes. She also prepared herself for the most difficult part, confronting her own family with evidence they wouldn't want to believe. Her son David adored Callista, saw her as his perfect eldest daughter. This revelation would shatter his perception of his family. But every time Marion wavered, she thought of Adeline's frightened eyes, of the way the girl jumped at sudden sounds, of the bruises hidden beneath her clothing. Protection of the innocent had to come first. The opportunity Marion had been waiting for came 3 weeks later. Callista was sleeping over at her house, and after what she thought was bedtime, she called her best friend Emma on her cell phone. Marion had prepared for this possibility. Her old voice recorder, a relic from her teaching days when she recorded lessons, was positioned perfectly to capture conversations from the guest room. What she heard made her stomach turn. "Emma, you should have seen it today," Callista was saying, her voice bright with excitement. "I made it look like Adeline broke Mom's favorite vase. I just had to scratch myself a little and cry, and everyone believed me immediately." Emma's voice was faint but audible. "Doesn't that make you feel bad?" Callista laughed, a sound completely different from any emotion Marion had ever heard from her. "Why would it? She's such a little mouse anyway, and everyone always believes me because I'm the good daughter. It's so easy." "What if she tells on you? Who's going to believe her? I'm 16. She's 12. I get good grades. She's failing math. I help around the house. She can't even remember to make her bed. Plus, I've been doing this for so long now that everyone just expects her to be the problem child." The conversation continued for another 20 minutes, with Callista describing in detail how she'd perfected the art of creating believable injuries, how she'd learned to cry on command, how she'd developed different stories for different types of accidents. She spoke about it like a game she was winning. Marion sat in her kitchen afterward, holding the voice recorder with trembling hands. The child she thought she knew, her eldest granddaughter, the one everyone praised for being so mature and responsible, was a stranger. More than that, she was a danger to her younger sister. But now Marion had what she needed: video evidence of Callista harming herself, audio evidence of her admitting to systematic deception and abuse, documentation of Adeline's injuries and psychological symptoms, testimony from teachers and neighbors. It was time to act. Before confronting her family, Marion knew she needed to understand exactly what she was dealing with. She spent the next week immersed in research, reading everything she could find about adolescent psychological disorders and manipulative behavior. She learned that what Callista was exhibiting had clinical names: Munchausen syndrome by proxy, narcissistic tendencies, and manipulative personality traits. The good news, according to the literature, was that these behaviors could be successfully treated in adolescence if intervention happened early enough. The bad news was that without intervention, these patterns typically escalated over time. Marion contacted Dr. Sarah Chen, a child psychologist who specialized in adolescent behavioral disorders. During their consultation, Dr. Chen explained that children like Callista often develop these behaviors as a response to feeling powerless or unimportant in some area of their lives. The manipulation gives them a sense of control. Dr. Chen explained. They're not necessarily evil or irredeemable. They're using the tools they've developed to meet psychological needs that aren't being met in healthy ways. But what about the victim? Marion asked, thinking of Adeline. The sibling being victimized will need extensive support and therapy as well. This kind of systematic psychological abuse can have lasting effects on self-esteem, trust, and the ability to form healthy relationships. Dr. Chen agreed to be present during the family confrontation, both to provide professional insight and to begin the process of evaluation and treatment planning for both girls. Marian also prepared herself emotionally for what was to come. She practiced explaining the situation calmly and factually, without accusation or blame. She rehearsed responses to the denial and anger she knew would come. Most importantly, she reminded herself that her goal wasn't punishment, it was protection and healing. Marian's next step was to carefully document the experiences of other adults who had observed the girls' interactions. She approached this delicately, not wanting to create gossip or rumors, but needing to establish that her concerns weren't isolated observations. Mrs. Patterson, Adeline's sixth-grade teacher, agreed to meet with Marian during her lunch break. "I've been worried about Adeline all year," she admitted. "Her academic performance has declined significantly, and she seems constantly anxious. She flinches when other students approach her quickly, and she rarely speaks up in class anymore." "Have you noticed anything about her relationship with her sister?" Marian asked carefully. "Callista picks her up from school sometimes." Mrs. Patterson said thoughtfully, "Adeline always seems diminished when she sees her coming, like she shrinks into herself." Mr. Rodriguez, the family's neighbor, had his own observations. "I was fixing their sink last month when I heard Callista yelling at Adeline in the backyard. Really harsh language for a big sister. But then, when her parents came outside, she switched immediately to this sweet, concerned voice, asking if Adeline was okay." Marian documented each conversation meticulously, asking each witness if they would be willing to share their observations with Adeline's parents if needed. Most agreed, their own concerns about the younger girl overriding any reluctance to get involved. She also gathered Adeline's medical records, with her son's permission, ostensibly to help coordinate care for all the accidents the girl had been having. The pattern was even clearer in black and white: 17 documented injuries in the past 18 months, far above the average for a 12-year-old girl. The final piece of evidence came sooner than Marian expected. On a Saturday afternoon, when both girls were at her house, Callista once again accused Adeline of hurting her, this time claiming her sister had pushed her down the basement stairs. Marian's heart raced, but not with panic. This time, she was ready. The security camera footage told the real story. At 2:47 p.m., Adeline was in the living room with Marian, reading quietly on the couch. At the same time, Callista was in the basement alone, deliberately throwing herself against the wall and then onto the stairs, creating the injuries she would later blame on her sister. The camera captured everything: Callista checking to make sure no one was watching, the calculated way she injured herself, and even her pause to examine the results in her phone's camera before coming upstairs. When Callista emerged 20 minutes later, limping and crying, claiming Adeline had pushed her, Marian was ready with her alibi. "That's impossible, dear," she said calmly. "Adeline has been right here with me the entire time." For the first time in Marian's memory, Callista looked genuinely confused. Her story was being questioned by an adult, something that apparently hadn't happened before. But, but she was just downstairs," Callista stammered, her practiced tears suddenly looking less convincing. "No, sweetie, she wasn't," Marian replied firmly. "She's been reading her book right here for the past hour." Adeline looked up from her book. confused by the conversation, but visibly relieved that someone was finally believing her innocence. That evening, Marion called her son. David, we need to talk. All of us. There's something happening with the girls that you need to know about. David Williams sat in his mother's living room, his world quietly collapsing around him. For the past hour, Marion had methodically presented evidence that painted his eldest daughter as a systematic abuser and his youngest as a victim he'd failed to protect. This can't be right, he kept saying. Even as he watched the security footage of Callista deliberately harming herself. Callista's a good kid. She gets good grades. She helps around the house. She's responsible. She's also 16 years old and struggling with some serious psychological issues. Marion replied gently, "This isn't about her being a bad person. David, it's about her needing help before this pattern becomes impossible to change." She played the audio recording of Callista's phone conversation, and David's last defenses crumbled. Hearing his daughter laugh about manipulating the family, about how easy it was to fool everyone, was devastating. "How long has this been going on?" he whispered. "Based on the medical records and my observations, probably at least 2 years, maybe longer. It's likely gotten worse over time as she's refined her methods." David buried his face in his hands. "I thought I was protecting them both. I thought I was being a good father." "You were being the father you thought they needed," Marion said compassionately. "But now you know the truth, and you can be the father they actually need." Together, they planned the family meeting. It would be the following Sunday, with Dr. Chen present to provide professional guidance. The goal wasn't to shame or punish Callista, but to start the healing process for everyone involved. "What if she denies everything?" David asked. "She might," Marion acknowledged. "But the evidence speaks for itself. And denial is often the first stage of coming to terms with difficult truths." Sunday morning dawned gray and drizzly, matching Marion's mood as she prepared her house for what might be the most difficult conversation her family had ever had. She arranged the living room carefully comfortable seating in a circle, tissues readily available, and all the evidence organized but not immediately visible. Dr. Chen arrived early to review the materials and plan the approach. "It's important that we frame this as a health issue, not a moral failing," she reminded Marion. "Callista is going to feel attacked and afraid. If we want her to be receptive to help, we need to approach this with compassion, even while being clear about the consequences." When David arrived with both girls, the atmosphere in the room was tense. Callista seemed confident, probably expecting another situation where she'd be believed and Adeline would be blamed. Adeline sat close to Marion, seeking the safety her grandmother had always provided. "We're here because we all love each other," Dr. Chen began, "and because we want to understand what's been happening in this family. Sometimes people we love are struggling in ways that aren't immediately obvious, and it takes courage to address those struggles directly." Callista shifted uncomfortably. For perhaps the first time in years, she was in a room where she wasn't automatically viewed as the victim or the responsible one. "We have some things to show you," Marion said gently, reaching for the laptop where she'd compiled the evidence. "And I want everyone to remember that we're here because we love each other, not because anyone is in trouble." But even as she said it, Marion knew that everything was about to change. The silence in Marion's living room was deafening as the security camera footage played on the laptop screen. Everyone watched Callista deliberately injuring herself in the basement, checking her appearance in her phone camera, and then limping upstairs to blame Adeline for pushing her. Callista's face went through a series of expressions: shock, fear, anger, and finally, a kind of cold calculation as she tried to formulate a response. "That's not, I mean, You don't understand what really happened, she began, but her voice lacked the conviction it usually carried. Let's listen to this next, Marion said quietly, playing the audio recording of Callista's phone conversation with Emma. As Callista's own voice filled the room, describing her systematic deception as a game she enjoyed winning, her father's face crumpled. Adeline began to cry, not from fear this time, but from relief that someone finally believed her. I know this is difficult. Dr. Chen interjected gently. Callista, I want you to know that nothing you're hearing changes the fact that everyone in this room loves you. But we need to talk about what's been happening and why. You don't understand, Callista said, her composure finally cracking. It's not like that. Adeline gets everything. Everyone thinks she's so sweet and innocent. I have to work twice as hard for any attention. It was the first honest thing she'd said in the room, and Dr. Chen immediately picked up on it. That sounds like it's been really frustrating for you, the psychologist said. Can you tell us more about feeling like you have to work harder for attention? What emerged over the next hour was a picture of a girl who felt overshadowed by her younger sister's natural charm, who had discovered that being the victim or the hero got her the attention she craved, and who had gradually escalated her behavior when simple lies weren't enough anymore. I never meant for it to go this far, Callista whispered, finally looking at Adeline. I liked it when people worried about me. It wasn't a complete confession, and it wasn't a full apology, but it was a crack in the wall she'd built around herself. The immediate changes in the household were swift and non-negotiable. Callista would begin intensive therapy with Dr. Chen twice a week. She would temporarily move into the guest room, giving Adeline her own safe space. Most importantly, she would never be alone with her sister until Dr. Chen deemed it safe. I understand you're angry, David told Callista that evening as they discussed the new rules. But these boundaries aren't punishment, they're protection. For both of you. Callista's initial response was predictable anger, bargaining, and attempts to manipulate the situation. She tried claiming the evidence was fake, that Marion had always favored Adeline, that the therapy was unnecessary because she was fine now. Dr. Chen had warned the family to expect this. Resistance is normal, she explained during their first session. Callista has built her entire identity around being the good daughter, the victim, the one who needs protection. Having to confront the reality of her behavior is essentially asking her to rebuild her sense of self. The therapy sessions were difficult. Callista alternated between claiming she'd been misunderstood and insisting that her behavior was justified. She talked about feeling invisible unless something dramatic was happening, about the rush of control she felt when people believed her stories, about how easy it had become to manipulate situations to her advantage. It's like being an actress, she admitted during one session. I could make anyone believe anything. It made me feel powerful. Meanwhile, Adeline began her own healing journey. Years of systematic psychological abuse had left her anxious, hypervigilant, and convinced that she was fundamentally clumsy and accident-prone. Learning to recognize that none of the accidents had been her fault was a slow process. I kept thinking I must be doing something wrong, she told Dr. Chen. Like maybe I really was pushing her or hurting her and just didn't remember. 3 months into therapy, the first real breakthrough came. Callista had been having a difficult day at school, a bad grade on a test, a conflict with friends, and found herself planning another incident to get attention and sympathy. Instead of acting on the impulse, she stopped herself and called Dr. Chen. I wanted to make it look like Adeline broke my laptop, she admitted during an emergency phone session. I had it all planned out, but then I realized I don't actually want to hurt her anymore. It was a small step, but a crucial one. For the first time, Callista had recognized her manipulative impulse and chosen not to act on it. The family therapy sessions that followed were emotionally intense. David had to confront his own role in the situation, how his praise for Callista's maturity had inadvertently rewarded her manipulation, how his focus on her achievements had made Adeline feel less valued. I thought I was raising a responsible young woman, he said during one particularly difficult session. Instead, I was enabling someone who was systematically hurting her sister. Marian, too, had to examine her own blindness to the situation. I saw the signs, she admitted, but I wanted to believe that children weren't capable of such calculated deception. Slowly, painfully, the family began to learn new ways of communicating. They established regular family meetings where both girls could express their feelings without fear of retaliation. They implemented new rules about privacy, respect, and consequences that applied equally to both daughters. Most importantly, they began to see each other clearly for the first time in years. By September, 9 months after the initial confrontation, Callista had made significant progress. She still struggled with impulses to manipulate situations, but she was learning to recognize these urges and find healthier ways to meet her emotional needs. I joined the drama club at school, she told Dr. Chen during one session. It's weird, but I can get that same feeling of soul performance, I guess, without hurting anyone. She had also begun to understand the impact of her behavior on Adeline. During a supervised conversation between the sisters, Callista made her first genuine apology. I know sorry doesn't fix what I did to you, she said, tears streaming down her face. I stole your childhood. I made you afraid in your own house. I made everyone think you were the problem when you were just trying to survive. Adeline, now 13 and stronger than she'd been in years, looked at her sister carefully. I appreciate you saying that, she said quietly, but I need time to trust you again. It was a mature response that showed how much both girls had grown. The family had also learned to celebrate different types of achievements. David made sure to acknowledge Adeline's artistic talents, her kindness to others, and her resilience, not just her academic performance. With Callista, he focused on praising her genuine accomplishments and her progress in therapy, rather than her ability to appear perfect. I'm learning that there's a difference between being good and looking good, Callista reflected during one therapy session. I spent so much energy looking good that I forgot how to actually be good. 5 years later, Marian sat in her garden watching her granddaughters prepare for Adeline's high school graduation party. Callista, now 21 and in her third year of college studying psychology, was hanging streamers while Adeline, 17 and confident in a way she'd never been as a child, directed the decorating process. The relationship between the sisters wasn't perfect. There was still a cautiousness in their interactions, a careful respect for boundaries that hadn't existed in healthy families, but it was real in a way it had never been before. I want to work with kids who are struggling like I was, Callista had told the family the previous year when she declared her major. Maybe I can help them find better ways to get attention than hurting people. It was a goal that filled Marian with pride and hope. Adeline had grown into a remarkable young woman confident enough to stand up for herself, compassionate enough to forgive, and strong enough to maintain healthy boundaries. She planned to study education, following in her grandmother's footsteps. Grandma Marian taught me that sometimes the most important thing you can do is see what's really happening, she'd written in her college application essay, and then have the courage to act on what you see. That evening, as the family gathered for dinner, Marian reflected on the journey they'd all taken. The confrontation 5 years ago had been devastating, but it had also been necessary. Early intervention had saved both girls, one from becoming a victim, the other from becoming someone she couldn't live with. Thank you, Callista said quietly to Marion as they cleaned up after the party, for seeing what was happening, for not letting me become someone worse. Marion hugged her granddaughter tightly. We all deserve the truth, she said, and we all deserve the chance to heal. As the sun set over their small town, Marion felt a deep sense of satisfaction. She had learned that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to look away from painful truths. Sometimes protection requires confrontation, and sometimes the best way to save a family is to risk everything to save it. The story could have ended so differently, with Adeline's spirit completely broken, with Callista escalating to more dangerous behaviors, with a family destroyed by secrets and lies. Instead, it ended with hope, with healing, and with the knowledge that even the most damaged relationships could be rebuilt on a foundation of truth and unconditional love. In her final journal entry about the experience, Marion wrote, "Truth is often painful, but it is always the beginning of healing, and healing, no matter how difficult, is always worth the journey."